Hi, I'm Arish Shah, host of the Nothing Ventured podcast. As a CFO that has operated in the startup and scale-up ecosystem for the last decade, and as a founder myself, I found it absolutely essential to learn from those that have come before me. So this podcast is an exploration of the people, the characters, the stories, and the narratives that make the venture ecosystem go round. From emerging fund managers to established VCs, from angel investors to founders. I chat to people that make the tech ecosystem thrive. Please remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast because it really helps with our discoverability. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the pod. In today's episode, I talk to Theo Priestley. Theo is a globally recognized and sought after futurist, an international speaker, author, and authority on the future of business, technology, and society, focusing on the convergence of emerging trends, including Web3, spatial computing, and artificial intelligence. In today's episode, we talked about possible futures, running around with wheels on our legs, writing about the future during the pandemic, and what it means to have a tangled bag of wires in your brain. Let's get straight into it. So, we talked a little bit about what work you do as a futurist, but I'd like to dig into that a little bit further, right? So how much about being a futurist is about being right in the absolute versus being directionally correct? Or is that the wrong way of thinking about it? And with the pace of change we're currently experiencing, how do you balance sort of data-driven insights with more speculative or imaginative thinking?
I don't think any futurist should claim to be absolutely correct, because it's not really about that. Again, it's about speculative and possible futures. And there's any myriad of things that can upset that. So anyone saying, oh, it will be factually correct that by 2050 we're all going to be running around with wheels on our legs instead of feet, then that's just absolute nonsense. Again, it's about navigating, helping people sort of understand what are the possible futures, what are the scenarios, what are the decisions that we need to make to get there, and what are the decisions to avoid as well. I think it's, again, it's about avoiding the things that we don't want to see as a future, as well as trying to guide it towards futures that we do want to see. So dystopia versus utopia, for example. So I think, again, trying to nudge people in there, again, it's like, I'm not the one to know which is the correct future for everybody. I would like to see particular futures come about, but obviously other people, might not. But it's not my job to push people in that direction. My job is to lay it out in front of them and say, choose the one you want and make the decisions that will help you get to that future.
And so how do you use data versus kind of that speculative, imaginative thinking that I was talking about? Because I think, and maybe this is because I come from kind of a Excel spreadsheety background, and I think about kind of forecasting in terms of, I run through a bunch of assumptions and then I plug in some numbers and I see where those numbers take me. Is that the process, or is the process actually just sitting back in your armchair, as it were, and thinking about those possible future worlds? Like, how do you balance those two things?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a combination and a balance of both. I mean, you look at historical trends and you read research papers, and you also take a temperature check, in today's society, and see what people actually are thinking and doing. One of the things I always tell people to do is go out into a supermarket or a coffee shop and just stand and observe life, because a lot of the technology trends that we see today, if you see a lot of hype from the evangelists and things like that. Oh, this is great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but if you stood in front of, if you stood in a supermarket for an hour, you will know for a fact that nobody in that supermarket would give a toss about what you're talking about, or frankly, probably wouldn't even know what you were talking about, because they have other things on their mind. So I think it's, for me, it's about looking at history and then saying, does history apply here? So for artificial intelligence, for example, I've had lots of running battles with other futurists and other sort of pundits that say, oh, it's like the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the motor car versus the horse and cart. And it's like, well, no, it's not, because nothing is hit and nothing will hit society, everything, everywhere, all at once. AI is one of these trends that we have lived with and been very aware of for decades through movies, books, science fiction, comics, all that kind of sort of thing. So we know, and we experience it every day. credit scoring applications and all, and and Siri and everything else. We know what AI is. So everybody, knows what artificial intelligence is and what it can be capable of. But now it's kind of here. Everybody is using it and everybody's kind of aware of what it can do. Beforehand, no one knew what a motor car was, and obviously it happened very slowly. Here it's just like kind of landed and splat. Everyone's playing around with it and trying to get an appreciation of it and where it can impact their life. And we haven't had a trend like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, and at the moment, I think people are playing at the peripheries, and there is still so much, and the pace of that is changing very quickly, right? So that if we think about the most obvious one, which is OpenAI ChatGPT, the pace of change and the plugins that are being added on a daily basis, the infrastructure that's being opened up is changing, far faster than Moore's law, right? So this is a truly exponential kind of growth curve in terms of where this stuff is heading. And kind of tying that in with your coffee shop point is, I was talking immediately preceding this podcast. I did a podcast with Alex Mann, who is a VC at TimeChain, which is a Bitcoin-focused VC fund. And we were talking about the fact that, where the world is heading is probably central bank digital coins versus Bitcoin, because it's a simple way of controlling money for governments, and we're already sitting in digital currencies. But and this is where the big but came up, and it ties in exactly with what you were saying around observing the realities on the ground. There is a huge amount of apathy and a lack of understanding and knowledge, and I think those of us that operate in these ecosystems can almost exacerbate our own understanding and or desire and or premonitions about what might happen. Whereas for your man on the street, like, they're worried about, can they afford the tin of beans today? Or, if the Tories remain in government here in the UK, whether they can afford a cheese sandwich, which apparently is a luxury nowadays. Those are without being too glib, those are the problems that are facing most people. And so, to your point, how does one therefore, make sure that people are cognizant and understanding and aware of these problems without also overwhelming them with too much sort of technical or even dystopian kind of outcomes, which then just scares them off. And I think most people, if they're scared off, or if they feel apathy towards something, if it doesn't impact them today, they'll tend to ignore it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what happened with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, for example, everybody in the technology and LinkedIn and everything else like that, and in our own little echo chamber, we're like, oh, well, that's it. It's the end of Facebook. Everybody's going to leave. We're going to quit. I'm logging off. That's it. Blah. The needle barely moved, and that was because nobody really cared. One, nobody cared. Two, you're talking about apathy. And three, to the average person who's using Facebook, they just want to post about their cats or their dogs or the latest meal or their kids. What did they do? That kind of thing. They don't care, and it's that perceived convenience versus what you have to give up to get it. So we are trapped in our own little echo chamber, especially in the technology industry. How do you strip it back? Well, it's really funny because if you look at some of the the tabloid newspapers in the UK, he's not the AI messiah. He's a very naughty chatbot. Was one, I think it was either the Daily Mirror or it was the Sun. I mean, and then you've got like AI is going to kill us all kind of thing, and you've got the Terminator picture and stuff like that. And of course, this is all great punditry, and it's all great for the masses to read and pick up. And of course, that completely sours the message that you want to actually give, which is, this is going to disrupt society. It's going to cause massive upheaval because of the job disruption. The governments aren't prepared. There's not enough money to go round, et cetera, and so on. How do you, how can you carry a message that has that kind of impact to people who are apathetic, who have bigger worries on their plate at this moment in time, versus trying to educate them that in 10, 15 years, the world could look very different? It's always going to be somebody else's or some other generation's problem. It's like climate change. It's too big for people to grasp. And of course, the climate change problem was always sold as, oh, the planet is going to die. Well, it's not. Civilization is going to end.
Yeah.
Planet has survived a giant meteor hitting it and wiping out everything on the planet. And then, millions of years later, it kind of woke up and went, I'm fine, thanks very much, dusted it off. You know, um,
Can we?
Climate change is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Once it gets rid of the virus that caused it in the first place, everything's going to flourish again. So
Yeah, and the problem is where the virus, right? And I think
yeah.
I think this is and this is the reality, right? Like I can't remember what the saying is, but I was just talking about this over the weekend as well. No, nobody ever looks after their 6-year-old self, right? Because that's in the future. That's something they don't need to worry about it today. Climate change one. I think you and I both have, if I'm not mistaken, fairly kind of adult-ish kids, right? Like teenage to kind of university age. And I've been telling my kids for quite some time now that, well, three things I would say. One, the education system is completely unfitted for purpose. I read something today which I kind of paraphrased and said, the school and education system sets our kids up to be workers, but it doesn't set them up to learn how to think, right? So it teaches them how to learn, it teaches them how to work, but doesn't teach them how to think. Number one. Secondly, university in my mind as an example is something that all kids currently have to go through just because of the antiquated kind of, again, recruitment system. But we're seeing more and more people not going to school. And of course, in the US, there was a huge kind of thing about not having been to university as being a badge of honor, and Peter Thiel and Founders Fund obviously had a huge kind of movement around that. But the third thing, and I think the most important thing, I've been saying to them for a long time, but only really kind of came home to roost, I guess, in November, December of last year, was the jobs that exist today are not the jobs that they're going to be doing, and therefore the skills that they need are going to be very different, and they're going to need to be massively broader in terms of their skill set. And that was kind of my feeling for a long time. And then OpenAI and generative AI happened, and I was like, oh shit, I kind of was right here. But I actually don't know what that world is going to look like, right? And to your point, it's how do we get people to think today about what the world is going to look like tomorrow, so that our kids and their kids can be best adapted to fit to it, right?
Again, I think it's very difficult to put something into words that will shake people from that apathy, because the impact is so wide. Whenever you talk about the future, it's always like, well, it's someone else's problem. It's too far out to think about. I just want to go on holiday in June for the school holidays, that kind of thing. But I think we're potentially aiming the message at the wrong people.
Got it.
And it's almost like the Greta Thunbergs of this world is obviously she's rattling the saber, and telling the older generation, look what you did, you burnt our future. But the message is resonating with the younger generation, because we're going to, I say we, Royal, we're going to have to take charge and actually, do something about it.
Yeah.
And I think if we start aiming that message at the younger generations and talking to them and making them aware of these facts, which is, you're 5, 6, 10, 15 now, and by the time another decade folds over, you're not going to have the same opportunities that you thought you had or were told in the school system. Your healthcare system is not going to be able to cope with the aging population that didn't look after itself, and you're going to have to think about, well, what does that mean for me? Am I going to have to give up my opportunities to look after my parents because they can't afford anything anymore, any private, or certainly to top up? Because I can't see the pension system existing for much longer. I can't see the national health care system existing in the way it is for much longer. But of course, it's not us that's going to suffer. It's going to be the future generations. So we have to kind of pivot the message towards these people, these younger people, and say, this is what we think is going to happen. And yeah, we fucked it up a bit. Sorry about that. But, it's bigger than climate change in a sense, because you're going to really live through it. And that's where we need to aim our message. But we do have to, again, back to futures and back to painting the pictures of, here are the choices that you have to make. It's all about educating on what those choices are. If you hit people with all the negative stories all the time, they're actually going to switch off. It's like Trump. At some point after Trump got elected and whatnot, people started tuning out to what he was doing, and that's quite dangerous.
Yeah.
because it was just like, oh, he's at it again.
It's the
Oh,
whole.
he's
It's all. I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and still get reelected tomorrow, or whatever. Right?
exactly, yeah. And and I think with the message, the negative messages, people have got that kind of, that's what makes them apathetic. It's like, oh, this again. Oh yeah, yeah, I've heard this before. Oh, well, I'm not going to bother. I'm tuning out. And they could actually miss a really critical piece of information that they could use to arm themselves for the next 5 years. So we have to stop being so negative that, there's no harm in saying this is bad, but at the same time, you have to say why it is bad, what choices do you have that
Mm,
can turn it around,
mm.
and how do you make it good for yourself? And then how do you make it good for your generation that comes afterwards? So
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think and to your point, it is about providing the avenues and the choices and the agency to those people to show them
mm,
how they can effect change rather than just sort of dumping, as it were, the situation on them and saying, well, you're gonna have to deal with it, good luck, right? Which I think is all too often what happens. So I interviewed Bronwyn Williams, who co-authored The Future Starts Now with you in 2020, I think. And as she said, when describing the book, the questions asked and attempted to be answered include everything from eugenics, unnatural selection, and immortality to the future of work in light of AI, UBI, and AR, and the future of nations, economies, and civilization at large in our increasingly compromised, unequal world. Given the pace of change over the last few years, right, and we're talking pandemic, generative AI, the collapse of the kind of venture ecosystem, do you think we've accelerated our march towards some of the utopian as well as dystopian futures envisaged in the book, or are you still kind of, the jury's as yet out?
well, I mean, nothing dates worse than a book. I mean, it's always a fixed point in time when you have an idea. And then, of course, it was actually written during the pandemic as well, which kind
Yeah,
of sort of put us in a unique position in terms of coping with something that affected the world and then trying to sort of apply that to some of the thinking about where it would go. I mean, and we did choose people, as far reaching as possible with different opposing views because of you know, having such a broad topic, the future, you can't tackle it with one perspective or two perspectives. You have to have multiple, and you have to have it from different regions across the world because everybody
yeah.
has a different perspective, and that's absolutely vital, especially in this profession. Um, so, I mean, the futures that we envisage in the book, I think, I would hope that they would still stand the test, the litmus test of time, a couple of years later, in terms of where we're going. And we did try to sort of, again, here's a dystopian vision, but also here's how to navigate it and make use of what we're trying to say, and arm you with that agency at the end to sort of make those decisions, whether it's about education, whether it's about space or spatial computing kind of sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, every author who writes a book hopes that people would still want to pick it up and check again. And I still, I hope people still pick it up and go, let's thumb through that chapter and actually see if they were right or wrong.
It's definitely something that I do. I don't actually go. I don't approach it from even from the did they get it right or wrong. But like the way I look at it is exactly as you said, right? These are all possible futures. None of them are
Mm,
written, right? Like they're written obviously because they're written in a book, but none of them are actually physically written in in the kind of karma of the universe, if
yeah.
I can put it that way. And we all have the ability to I guess influence our own futures and the futures of those around us. What I think for me came across most is we were at such an intersectional point, unprecedented, right, in the history of the world. Yes, we had the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which killed many, many more people, I think, than COVID-19 did, but did not have the response or the information or
Mm,
the ability to create vaccines essentially, in the space of whatever, 12 months. It was a completely different environment. The world stopped for 3 to 6 months, right at the beginning there in March of 2020. And I think it kind of felt like almost a really good point, and I assume this is partly why and how you came about writing the book, felt like a really good point to actually stop, pause, and reflect on, okay, what might happen, because there were so many. I mean, even forgetting about the longer term future, even the immediate future during that pandemic felt very, very uncertain, right? Would we have a vaccine? Would we be going through numerous lockdowns on a rolling basis? Would we be traveling again in the same way? Would we be doing the things that we would do? Would we ever work in an office again? Right? These are all, and these are questions that are still being debated, I guess, right? So yeah, it feels to me, as someone who's read the book and has kind of referred back to it on and off over the last couple of years, I always look at these things as what are the questions they're asking rather than what are the responses, what are the solutions necessarily that are being provided, because I think it's the questions that provoke the thought, and everyone has their own lived experience, and therefore the questions that you guys ask as authors, if I translate them into my own personal circumstances, I can come up with my own kind of answers to what that future might look like. So all that to say, I think it was a great book. I definitely recommend.
Thank you.
I definitely recommend to all my listeners that they do go out and buy it. But as a futurist, you're also always thinking about convergence. So can you share more about what that means to you, what the concept means, and how it influences your predictions and your thinking about the future, especially around Metaverse, Web3, and AI?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, a lot of the time I see people reporting on particular trends and they treat it as a separate thing, as a silo, and they don't connect dots to other trends and how it works. I mean, that's just the way my head has worked for a number of years. It's just a tangled bag of wires, and in there's a cat, and every so often the cat drags something out, and there's like 3 or 4 wires attached to each other. And I'd just come back from Thailand talking about banking, and again trying to relate banking towards Web3, Metaverse, and AI, and of course they've all been treated as separate trends. So we've got the DeFi trend, we've got the Metaverse trend, which they tried and failed at, and we've now got artificial intelligence seeping into the banking infrastructure in the front, middle, and back office. And there's a report, there's like 54% or something of banking functions and processes are likely to be disrupted or removed as a result of AI. But I see the confluence of several trends sort of coming together, because if you look at decentralization, for example, and I wrote a quick blog because I had this sort of thought around how do you tell people what this confluence looks like, or this convergence looks like, and I likened it to an orchestra. So if you think about the metaverse or spatial computing as the actual orchestra hall or the concert hall, and in there you've got the actual orchestra itself. Now the orchestra is made up of different components. You've got the woodwind section, the brass, the drums, etc., etc. And that's kind of like Web3 or decentralization, because in a sense it's all decentralized parts of the orchestra, but when it comes together, it works together. But in their own right, they are decentralized because they have their own function, they make their own sounds, and that sound is data. And AI is the conductor, bringing it all together and making sure that the data all works together in the right way, and it harmonizes everything. And that's how I kind of liken these 3 particular trends, which is, we have the metaverse and spatial computing, which is now going to be like a new paradigm. And it is different layers of reality. So you have virtual reality, augmented reality, or extended or mixed, however you want to call it. You've got physical reality, which we live in today. The existing web, which is just flat. You have the metaverse, which can be 2D and 3D. And you as a person should be able to interact in any number of these at the same time. And how does that work? Well, you have to have something that orchestrates these layers, which is AI. But how do you protect your identity and your sovereign data and everything? Well, that's Web3, that's decentralization. Yeah. So that's how I see the makeup of the world coming forward from that. But of course, there's far too many people going, we've got Web3 and DeFi and decentralization and blockchain and crypto, and that's just one thing, and never the twain shall meet with the other ones. So I think it's time to start bringing some of these trends together, and even the older ones like cloud and big data and analytics and stuff like that.
You said that with such a sneer in your voice as you said cloud. It just felt like
Yeah, I mean, having lived through some of these older trends as well and reporting on them and stuff, and nobody talks about these trends anymore because they're now,
they're
taken as
mainstream.
read, they're adopted.
Yeah.
And I want to get to that point where we have, decentralized technologies along with everything else that we have, and nobody talks about it. I wrote something today, which is, blockchain is the most boring infrastructure technology it is, but let it be boring, and because boring can be successful. But far too many people put blockchain at the top of the marketing material or the selling plot point. And it's like saying, yeah, our business runs on Excel. Yes, Excel, here we go. And it's like, nobody cares. What are you giving me that I can use to be useful? And we've kind of lost that with the modern trends.
So I think there's a couple of really interesting things there. I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, our last guest, actually actively suggests that blockchain is a complete scam and just a marketing facade and actually has zero value. I think there are almost certainly people that will argue with him about that, but I can see where he's sort of coming from, because in a lot of conversations I've had with a number of people, both within and outside the technology sector, the question always arises: this thing that has been built on the blockchain, what was stopping you from building it on traditional Web 2 technology or in a traditional database? And often there is no answer, no real differentiating answer that comes back. But the thing that struck me, I think, most when you were speaking, it's that whole thing about when does a trend become normality, right? And it's about when that technology becomes so inherently part of your day-to-day life that you don't notice it anymore, right? At the moment, you've got people shouting about these things, exactly as you said. You've got all the people saying, wow, crypto is a future, and then AI is a future, and something else in the future, quantum computing or whatever it might be. But actually it becomes a future when you don't even know that it's happening, right? And if I think about artificial intelligence, just as a very simple example, in the credit card industry, people do not realize that essentially their credit card fraud systems is essentially a pattern matching AI. Whereas previously it was, if your card was used in Canada, flag it as a fraudulent transaction. Literally, that's what they used to do back in whatever the 80s or 90s, right? So at the point where these technologies are just second nature in the technology we're already using, I think that's when people, when they stop becoming a trend. And I think this is the point. I think people are trying to push the narrative of this is a groundbreaking technology, as opposed to this technology just exists in everything you do. That's why you need to be aware of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's especially with something like blockchain. I mean, like you say, I mean, there's lots of Web 2 technologies and databases. Why don't you just use that? But again, the problem is that most people put the blockchain in front of the reason why, and then sell that as the reason that this product or solution
we're solving this with blockchain rather than we are solving this. And by the way, it happens to have been built on the blockchain.
Yeah. The other thing as well is that blockchain can exist without crypto. And so, it'd be interesting to see what your previous guest said about if they touched upon that, because, there's Hyperledger and there's other blockchain solutions that exist that don't require any form of crypto whatsoever. Because again, it was supposed to be an infrastructure layer. And of course, unfortunately, it just meant that people built, layer one protocols and then launched it with a token that obviously meant that they had some kind of financial incentivization to get involved, which is purely speculative.
Yeah. Well, that was his argument, essentially. Yeah.
Well, which is true. I mean, I think what is there? Who was it? CoinGecko or whatever is trying to get rid of 10,000 shitcoins at the moment off their exchanges. Because they're just nonsense.
Well, there's apparently 20. So the way he put it very simply was there are 25,000 other coins on whichever Coinbase or which I can't remember which exchange he mentioned, but he goes, number 6 on that is Dogecoin, which was literally a joke coin. And the top 10, if you take the market cap of the top 10,000, it doesn't even reach the market cap of Bitcoin. So they are very specifically Bitcoin focused. And yeah, his thesis is that all crypto other than Bitcoin goes to zero and has no value. That, I mean, which I'm sure there will be people, raising their arms up and would love to debate him on it. But that's the position that they as a fund are taking.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that even things like Ethereum aren't decentralized.
He
at
also
all
argued
because,
that, yeah.
yeah, and it makes there's a very strong case for that because of the way that however many wallets actually hold the majority of Ethereum, but two, they all sit on AWS and Google infrastructure anyway, as validator nodes. So, where's the decentralization aspect of that? And they were all, the other thing as well is that although Bitcoin was obviously decentralized and it was a cryptocurrency, the first cryptocurrency, but it was cryptocurrency meant to, free from fiat and give more power to people. All the other projects never really got around to any form of decentralization, really, and built things that were meant for the masses. It was always around the same people who would coalesce on Discord groups and jump from one Discord to another to follow where the next pump and dump scheme was. When I was when I was at that conference, I basically said, DAP Radar's tracking 19,000 decentralized applications. And let me think, if I do my math, 94% of them are split between gambling, high risk trading, gaming, and decentralized exchanges, and only 6% are for DeFi. Now, you would argue that the 6% is actually the most important use case that would actually proliferate across mass adoption because it gives people the ability to, manage their finances, check balances, do money transmission, lend, peer-to-peer lending, etc.
Or even simply participate in the financial markets, right?
Yeah, but there's 6%. Now, what does that say? It means that there's bugger all use, proper use case. Nobody's built a decentralized Uber, Deliveroo, shopping apps, things that people use. And so decentralization in Web3 has kind of failed in its attempt to be adopted. So that's still to happen, but I still firmly believe in a lot of the core ideologies behind that.
Yeah. I think, and again, we could probably spend a lot of time talking about crypto specifically. Yeah. I think it's one of these topics where, and especially because I think me personally, I have over the last several years, I've just been sort of observing from the sidelines saying, I don't get it, right? Like that's been my premise. Like, I don't get it. And I don't understand why this coin is being pumped to this level. And I don't understand why people are flocking to it. But, there were lots of people that were and lots of people that were involved. A lot of people that made great money. I'm sure there were lots of people that lost money on the other side because, of course, I think a lot of it was about greater fool theory. But switching tack back to kind of AI. So, since we've seen the explosion of generative AI, there have been a lot of hot takes on where we're heading, right? And I follow you on Twitter, and I see a lot of your vitriol at the moment going towards everyone that's trying to build the next mental health kind of tool using generative AI, which I agree with you would be an absolute crazy thing to do. And you have some very, very strong views, I would say. But what do you think the talking heads are getting right, and what are they missing at the moment, just in general?
Yeah, so with generative AI, I mean, we have to understand that these are, advanced algorithms at the heart. I mean, it's large language models trained on, 820 odd gigabytes scraped from the web. They don't care where they got it from. Same with Stability AI and basically taking everything in terms of artwork off the web with no permission, or attribution or understanding of IP protection and copyright. Now, humans are very good at anthropomorphizing. We talk to our cats. We believe that they can understand us. We give names to our cars. There are people who engage in marital and sexual relationships with dolls and have them sitting around their house for companionship. And people have done it with chatbots as well. So they will actively have conversations with chatbots,
There's
believing that they
Replica,
are.
I think, has come out as one
Yeah,
of the big ones out there at the moment. Yeah.
yeah. Now these are very sophisticated chatbots, but they are not human in any way. They do not convey empathy. They do not understand the context of any scenario you pitch to them, because they're basically understanding the string of words that you put together in a sentence, and then they'll spit back something that's very convincing. The other thing as well is that when they do answer you, you tend to use words and phrases which make them appear human and empathic, and understanding.
But
So,
very inauthentic, I would say, for the most part.
well, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I remember a really bad study about a ChatGPT is more empathic than a doctor in answering questions on a subreddit. And it's like, oh, let's just dig into this a little bit. And you look at it and it's like, oh, I stubbed my toe. What can I do about it? Kind of example. And of course, a doctor's got limited time, limited capacity, and it's like, get over it, stick a plaster, come back to me in a couple of days when your toe goes black. And then, but ChatGPT, because it's got all the time in the world, oh, I'm very sorry to hear that you've stubbed your toe. It must have been a very painful experience for you, etc. And of course, immediately someone's going to think, oh, it knows me, it understands me, it knows my pain. And this is the problem, is that we kind of latch onto something and say, oh, it knows us, and it doesn't. And so it's very dangerous, unethical, and immoral to push these kind of technologies and this very simple, in a way, artificial intelligence as something that is capable of handling very human-centered problems.
Yeah.
So it's very good at spitting out, ideation, for example. I've got a business idea. Can you help me do some research around it? I want to do some marketing. What's a clever slogan? Draw me a picture of something on a beach licking an ice cream, blah, blah, blah. It can do all of these things and help us kind of like 60, 70% of the way there. So we can actually understand our thought process, and then we take it the last mile, but it helps us get off the ground. But giving it things that are very human-centered, I think, is an absolute dire situation waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I remember even going back, it's simple as, I think, 6-7 years ago, I saw this massive kind of emergence of people that were trying to build social media apps to deal with the mental health problems that had been created by social media apps. And it was this kind of really recursive, bizarre. And I'm just sat there going, do you not see the inherent flaw in kind of what you're doing here? And I think it's precisely that, with those that are kind of trying to, build in that trying to game almost the human condition. I mean, without guardrails in place, the potential for harm is immense, right? But to your point, it is the sort of tool that can get you 70% there, and it's interesting. I've seen a lot of stuff like, you can use ChatGPT to become to become your podcast researcher and give you questions about your guests and so on and so forth. So I ran an experiment and I fed it our podcast links, guest links, a bunch of the questions that I've previously asked the guests, etc., etc. First of all, it came back with I've understood nothing ventured. Here are some of your previous guests. None of them had ever been on the podcast, so completely got that wrong straight off the bat. And then the questions that it actually comes out with were like really, really crap, like very, very basic sort of level. What I would imagine, a university student trying to sound smart, running a podcast. And I don't want to denigrate university students, but someone who hadn't had much experience trying to just ask what they thought would be a smart question to ask a smart person, but actually it just comes out as a little bit canned and a bit sort of, it's kind of par for the course. So out of 10 questions, I think I might have pinched half a dozen words from one of those questions to frame something that I've asked you, but it certainly wouldn't pass muster. You couldn't have it ask questions. It would not come across as a very human interaction. So where do you, so to your point, I think it sounds like you think where we are today is that it gives you that 70. So essentially it becomes your co-pilot, right? To help you do what you do well better by essentially saving you the time from all the kind of administrative tasks that you might have to do in the run up to whatever you're trying to output. But as we move forward the next 3, 5, 10 years, I mean, do you think we are at risk of, I'm a CFO, for example, are we at risk of seeing those sort of jobs disappear? Law, legal, even creative industries, copywriting, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what you perceive to be the kind of direction we're traveling in, or is it something different?
Yeah. So I do think over the next sort of 10 to 15 years that as these tools get more sophisticated, the risk gets higher. The level of task automation and complex tasks that they can handle will increase. Yeah. We're not going to see lawyers disappear overnight, for example, but I do think a vast majority of what a lawyer and paralegals do will be severely impacted. And I think it's where in that career ladder in various industries do we look at that are actually going to be impacted. So I remember doing a talk in Peru, of all places, a couple of years ago, where they were asking me about AI, and I presented it as a career ladder, and it was like, here's someone climbing up the career ladder. They got their first job, data entry or some really entry level stuff, and then this rising wave was starting to sort of get higher and higher, and it removes those entry level jobs. So of course, when you leave university, the first thing you do is get an entry level job and an internship and stuff. But of course, now you're fighting against a really sophisticated AI that can do these jobs. The other thing as well is that, and Bronwyn and I discussed this on a podcast once, which was, there's going to be this fatty glut of middle management that everybody hates, which are going to be impacted as well, because no organization is going to pay people, middle managers, a very large salary to babysit AI. Yeah. Which is essentially what they're going to be reduced to. So in a sense, that actually completely redoes what a target operating model will look like. Because you suddenly have the mundane, the very administrative jobs, the entry-level jobs, customer service jobs, processing jobs taken away by AI. So what does that mean for your target operating model? What does it mean for management? But what does it mean for the impact on society for people who actually that's their only option for a job in terms of white collar?
Yeah, but not only that, you then get to the next problem. I think about this all the time, right? Like as someone who operates in finance, the only way you get to be a CFO is by having the experience of 20 years of working in industry, operating in businesses, etc. To your point, if those entry level roles aren't there, and it's a great example because even if you look in the UK and US, the number of people that are qualifying as accountants is drastically diminished over time because it's no longer seen as a great industry to be in for whatever reason. But as you see more and more automation of those entry level kind of tasks, you then don't build up the experience to get to that kind of CFO level. So you may see in 15, 20 years, well, okay, the AI is doing all of this stuff, but there's now no one that can do the strategic or the heavy lifting side that was being done, or where we had a natural kind of flow of people coming up the ladder and through the ranks and arriving those positions because they're not getting in at the ground floor in the first place, and therefore cannot be trained in those essential skills that take them up towards those higher level positions. So that's the thing that I'm still kind of grappling with in my head is, yes, AI may well replace those entry-level positions, but then what happens in the future when you need the people that would normally have graduated to those sort of higher-level positions? They're just simply not coming through the ranks anymore.
Well, that kind of begs a question about education then. And what is the role of education in that? Because if you're training people just to start a career at the bottom, how do you completely turn education on its head to give people the skills to start pretty much near the top in a sense, or understand how to operate at the top and that strategic level thinking? And of course that just becomes, well, what are these skills? What are the skills that that we're not teaching them right now? Well, obviously it's business skills for a start and life skills, but it's critical thinking, it's foresight, in a way, futurism. How do we predict for the future? It's data driven insight, it's gut instinct, all those things that we kind of force out of children at
It's all
school.
the creativity that we essentially
Exactly,
dampen down.
In a sense, you could take all of these disciplines and actually add them to the humanities, and you would actually get someone who could think at a strategic level and run a business, or run, the finance organization of a business, or run the data operation of a business, etc. And it would be really interesting to see, because the humanities have been shit on for years as being.
I was going to say, like, STEM versus STEAM versus, like,
Yeah.
And actually STEM is the first. If you think about what's happening with engineering, right? So software development, like, already in decline, because you can literally get the AI. It turns out AI is really good at writing basic software, and then you can build from that, right?
Yeah. I mean, so ever since the sort of the first, well, the Tony Blair sort of Labour government came into power, kind of sort of thing, there was a very obvious push to learn digital skills. Everything was about learning digital skills, and of course that just meant that there was even blue collar work, people were leaving their blue collar jobs to learn coding and stuff like that. But of course, all we've done is just set up perfect society to be disrupted by AI, because it's going to, the first thing it's going to do is basically take away all the digital skills that we've learned. So that leaves us, in a sense, with, well, what's left? What can an AI not do? Well, it can not be human. So what does it mean to be a human? Well, sociology, psychology, all these kind of sort of jobs. Yeah, philosophy, the thinking parts and the creative parts, the arts and humanities are going to become probably the strongest defense against levels of automation from AI and robotics that we will have. And all we need to do is actually infuse that into all the specific job sectors that we've had in the past, and actually make them core, rather than just this thing. Oh, no, you can't make money from thinking as a philosopher, so don't bother studying it. Well, turns out it's possibly our greatest defense now.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel not so bad about having read languages at university now. But no, I mean, and just to wrap up on that point, I guess at the moment we're seeing sort of the explosion of prompt engineering as a discipline. I mean, I think that will also get automated away, because the AI will learn how to prompt itself, or what, it'll improve its understanding of even basic level prompts. But the people that are being recruited into those sort of roles are people that understand how to think about thinking, how to ask the right questions, right? Which tend to be people with philosophy degrees, or who have maybe majored in economics, or English or literature or whatever, because they understand that human condition. They understand also how to ask the right sort of questions to get the right sort of answers. Theo, it's been an absolute roller coaster. Lovely to have had you on the pod with me today. I'm so thankful for you having joined us. For our audience, where's the best place for them to find you online? I know, but where are you on LinkedIn and Twitter?
Well, yeah, literally that. I'm on Twitter it's at TPRSTLY. I'm on LinkedIn at Theo Priestley. You can find me there. I've also got my personal website, which is theopriestley.com, and occasionally I might venture out and blog on my Medium, which is at Theo. So you'll find me on there.
And of course, do not miss the opportunity to find a conference where Theo is also talking at. But in the meantime, Theo, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you again for asking.